Okay, hello, welcome. Welcome to a Photographer Talks. This week at a slightly different time of midday in the UK because my guest this week is Krystle Wright, who is coming in to us directly from the Sunshine Coast in Australia. So time-wise, it's a little bit different, and hence why we've brought it forward. We've had some pretty good talks up until now with the likes of Michael Clark and Craig Kaleski. So do go back and have a look on the channel and see those talks. They're very interesting and pretty amazing photographs, and the stories behind them astounding, as well as hearing what the photographers have been up to during this time of COVID, very different for all of us. But as far as this week's guest goes, Krystle Wright. So Krystle has been a photographer for a very long time. She's a remarkable adventure photographer, cinematographer, and director who hails from Australia. She has become pretty famous actually, very well known for her semi-nomadic, or rather probably more nomadic lifestyle that she is on. She is continually on a quest to find the next best shot to present, capture unique moments from extreme sports, crazy adventures, expeditions all across the globe. She has worked for a large number of global companies with big names from Canon through to Garmin, Patagonia, and Amazon. In recent years, she has developed quite a passion for storm chasing, and has recently been doing just some of that. We'll see some images and hear what her exploits have been very soon. So as I mentioned, hailing from the Sunshine Coast in Australia, that's where she is currently today. So please join me in welcoming Krystle Wright to your screens. Let me just get it all working. There she is. Hello there, Krystle. How are you?
Evening. Yeah, no, doing good. How are you?
We're great. We're great. The sun is shining. I'd have to say that we almost have Australian weather here today. I don't think I've worn a t-shirt and shorts in May in Britain for a very long time.
Well, there you go.
Yes, exactly. And it's quite late for you there today, isn't it? It's 9 o'clock at night, so I believe. Am I right?
Yes, you are right.
Cool. So thanks for joining us and dialing in. How have you been? Just briefly, this is arguably the longest time you've probably spent at home in many years, if this is indeed what you call home. So, how are you doing in general?
Yeah, the last time that I traveled overseas was in December, and typically I'm on the road for 11 months a year. But first thing that happened to me was some health issues, so that forced me to stop for a couple months, and then just as I started booking work again in March, that was all cancelled overnight, and yeah, I've been home for 6 months now, and I have to admit I do get tired. The amount of people who keep jumping immediately to the assumption that, oh, I must be getting itchy feet and I must want to get back on the road. But to be honest, I don't. I'm actually really enjoying this. I think it's a massive silver lining for myself, and I know that when I talk about having that luxury, that I realize others are doing it much tougher. And but I guess that I've got no choice but to I'm in my own situation and I'm trying to see the positive in this. So to be honest, I wonder if I can get through this whole year with no international travel. I mean, I believe Australia's borders are going to remain shut for quite some time, so I may as well make the most of it.
You're not interestingly, you're not the first person to say something along those lines. I mean, there's really obviously everything's changed, and we'll touch on it after we've discussed seen and discussed some of your pictures. But to hear that you're enjoying it is also it's great. I mean, it's very positive. Michael, who I was speaking to last week, he's the same. He hasn't really left home, and he's kind of actually it's really quite nice. It's a good change, and it's one that is a leveler. and it forces you to kind of just take a bit of time for yourself, which you know, despite saying what you said, you have been on the road a lot, and so it must be nice to just take a bit of a chill pill,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So look, we'll come back to that, and we'll have a bit of a further discussion. But I'd love to kick off with some of the pictures that you've kindly sent for us to show and discuss. And the first one that we're going to put up on screen is one of a base jumping shot. Now, you said this was in the Antarctic. Is that right?
Arctic.
Arctic.
Oh, that's the
Damn,
other
it
one.
was the other way. Okay, so I'm going to put it up on screen, and I'd love to hear a little bit of story behind this because this is fascinating for the people watching. Oops, people watching. It looks like a very big landscape shot above the clouds, but if you look to the right hand side of the picture, you'll see this tiny little chap jumping off what must be a ridiculously high piece of rock. So tell us what's going on here and what brought you to this point, and in fact, where on earth were you when you even took this photograph?
So this is going back to 2010, and I would say this is the first true expedition that I ever got to go on. I had been shooting a lot in Australia up until this point. There was the occasional trip, but once I got the invite from a friend of mine to join on this trip, uh, I just immediately jumped on that opportunity. And so it was a month-long expedition in the Arctic. And coming from Australia, I visited the snow a couple times, but I've never camped in snow. I've never mountaineered. And so I will admit that I knew that I was taking quite a big risk in coming with very little experience. And so, yeah, it's tough to talk about sometimes because I never want to encourage someone else to just um, go out there and not have the correct experience or something. But then sometimes you have to throw yourself in the deep end to build that experience.
Dude, very true.
And so I was photographing base jumpers for a month, and Baffin Island is spectacular. And this is actually the first day, so maybe it's like the day three. We set up base camp, and this was the first clear day. So we near camp we would hike up, and I'd never done that sort of hiking before, or I guess mountaineering, I should say. And so one of my memories from that day is that we were each given like a duffel bag of dried food. Well, not even dried food, sorry, like your packets where you add hot water, and
Yeah.
those were your meals, and that's what we had for the month. And I remember that morning I had tried the powdered eggs, and I would recommend anyone to never ever try powdered eggs. And so, and that's all I had. And so as we started climbing, and if you've never hiked in very cold weather or even like in mountaineering conditions, so like heavy snow and you're punching through and variable conditions, I absolutely burned and crashed on the way up. I got to a point like my body had burned through all the fuel, all the carbs, and I had like a little piece of chocolate on me, and that saved me because I just needed that little sugar boost. And so that was my first massive lesson of like, you have to eat and load up on, as much energy as you can, suitable for what you're doing that day.
Absolutely.
And so I got to the top, and it was the only day really the whole trip where everyone was going to do this jump. So there's 23 base jumpers.
Okay.
And so they staggered it in three groups. And the first two groups, so say 14 jumpers, I was actually on the opposite side. So I had silhouetted them against the sun. And it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I've got this angle, I've got this shot. And as a mentor always taught me, he's like, once you have the safe shot, then you've got to experiment. You've got to try something new.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I may as well, hike around this. Like there was like a bowl sort of feature. So like I hiked around, found a rock to perch on. The last group finally gets there, and I remember being so cold. Like I'm sitting on this rock, And in the image, you can see the clouds starting to come in. So it's actually the front of like this blizzard coming in. And so the wind starts to pick up. And I just remember like my cameras being metal. Um, it was so hard to hold them because my fingers were so cold. And this photo is actually the very last jumper of that day. Everything came together. And the funny thing is, I sort of knew deep down that I was never going to get a better image that trip. I'm like, I know I had the whole trip still coming up, but I just knew that image was my favorite. And to this day, it's still one of my favorite images. I've never, like a lot of my work, I evolved from it. I'm always looking back and really heavily criticizing the work that I do. But this is thankfully one of those images where I've fallen in love with this image, and I don't think that's ever going to change.
Yeah, it's very much an image that sort of shows man conquering nature in a way. I mean, you're. Yeah, I've lived in the mountains and I've been to them lots of times, and I know obviously you can get above the cloud line, but to just see that fact that there's this person right up there and you've hiked all the way. Obviously, you've heard the story and you've hiked higher and had one hell of a job to get there to be above that person. Now, knowing that that person's got to be a pretty reasonable height up to do a base jump, regardless. I think
Yeah.
it's epic, and you've kind of got a bit of golden hour in there. You've got the clouds moving in. It's just, I can see why you like it.
Well, it's when you have an image that you know that it doesn't matter how much planning or, if you had an opportunity to shoot it again, it'll never be the same. And I had come back to that jump a couple of times in the trip because it was an easy one for people to access and do again and again. And nothing ever came close to that day. So I think there's always something special when you recognize a certain image that you know that the chances of ever getting that again it's near, well, basically impossible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can see that. I mean, I have to chuck it up again one more time, just so people can see. There's some really nice comments. It's killer. It's an amazing photograph. I'm kind of intrigued to know what's below the cloud line. Is it a big
Well, this
industrial city, or or is it nice beautiful landscapes?
well up in Baffin, like these fjords, it's interesting. Like you think when you look across a fjord, you think, okay, it's not that far away. It ended up being like 8 kilometers wide, these fjords, like fjords, sorry. They're massive. And so we had gone in like mid-April, 2010, and stayed till mid-May. And that's like the prime time for the Arctic for expeditions to happen because you start to enter that 24-hour daylight time. And it's sort of that balance between conditions still being frozen enough, but also the days are warming up a bit. And after mid May, things start to warm up pretty quick, and fjords are notorious for starting to break up around then, or maybe, sorry, a bit further on. But since I've been there in these past 10 years, I heard expeditions returning to that same area have had to go earlier and earlier just because, well, climate change.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, oh yeah, I should mention too. Sorry, the jump. When base jumpers did that jump, it was a 3,000 foot overhang. So for them, it was like perfect. And I guess the last bit to that story, and this is the riskiest thing that I did do, and of course I got grilled by mates when I got back, is the fact that I was always hiking down by myself. And thankfully everything worked out. I did have some close calls during the trip, but
Mm.
as friends reminded me, they're like, Krystle, if you had, you know, had an accident where you broke a bone or something like, and if I wasn't in radio contact, which was pretty often, I put myself at a lot of risk, at a lot of exposed risk. And in those environments, I should have had a partner. But back then, I was so eager to just go on an expedition and have an opportunity to be in such an extreme environment that I went for it. And so that's probably the one expedition I probably took the most risk in. And I'd say if I was ever in an alpine environment again, yeah, I would need someone with me. It's just you're in polar bear territory. I didn't have a gun on me. And the Inuits were like, no, no, don't worry. The polar bears, they're going to be out in the sea ice hunting. But even so, it's like it's nature. There's
Yeah, you
like
never know. You never
who
know.
knows. So anyway, that was a pretty wild trip.
That's amazing. Definitely a steep learning curve. I mean, wow. come away with a couple of few life lessons there, it sounds like. Just a few. So look, moving from one base jumper to another person up in the air, we've got a really cool black and white shot here, which I'm going to pop up on the screen. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about this. This is super cool. Like, where is this?
Yeah. So, the second expedition that I ever did was going to Pakistan. And friends of mine, Hernan Pitoko, Horatio Lorenz, and Tom Dodolodor, there are three world-class paragliders, all associated with Red Bull. And we'd gone to Pakistan in 2011. We'd just been talking about it. And I'm so fascinated with places that aren't your typical holiday destinations. And this image, though, sorry, I'm never good at telling a short story. I always talk for way too long.
I'll cut you off. I'm going to cut you off. Carry
on. But this image is actually 2016. So the first time I went to Pakistan was 2011. If people are familiar with my story, they know that trip ended pretty badly for me in a pretty serious accident. And with the guys, we always talked like, we got to go back. Like, it was just so spectacular. It's worth going back again. And so 5 years later, we all came back together and returned back to Hushay. We only came back for 3 weeks this time. And I have to admit, I had massive anxiety attacks when it came to taking off and landing in paragliders. Like, I still love it. But the first flight that I got to do, we had a pretty first taking off, because I took off in the spot where I had the crash. And then when we landed, we actually got a bit caught out with thermals. We were desperately trying to make it to this village because we'd flown pretty close to Mashabroom. And as we're coming back up the valley, we would just start losing massive altitude. And then as we landed, it was basically in a rock field. And somehow we just found this one patch of dirt. And I just remember my heart being in my mouth and just thinking, what the hell am I doing again? But it worked out. Anyways, but the crazy thing is that we came back in June. We'd done this, like, been there in June before, and usually conditions were, pretty good. But this time, for 3 weeks in Hushay, I only got 3 flights. And the guys, and I didn't fly every time, because going up in a tandem, it's just so much more hard work and logistics. And I like, with the athletes I work with, I don't ever want them to feel like we're only here for photos. No, we're here for them to do their trip. And if I have the opportunity to document, great. But I never want to change the plans or enforce like the media or, photography angle. I like to be the fly on the wall. So I only had 3 flights. One of them was a complete bomb out. So bomb out means like you take off, you don't catch any thermals, and you basically just go straight to a landing place. There was one flight where it was, it was fun. But then this flight, when I got this image, that was just amazing. We got up above the Karakoram once again, and we had this amazing cross-country flight, and we found this one ridge line, and we did a couple laps across, and of course the light's getting lower, and I fly in a tandem paraglider. Some other photographers like Jodie McDonald, I just think hats off, because she's able to be a paragliding pilot and shoot. And now I've been in discussion with the pilots, like Tom and Horatio, and for a couple of years they're like, Krystle, you have to fly. Like, it's too hard to keep finding a tandem pilot for you. But then as the years went on, they've gone, actually, no. We take that back. You should keep flying tandem, because it's really difficult to combine both. Because if you're flying in places, with really challenging conditions, and that's what it can be like in Pakistan at those high altitudes, is that if I've taken my hands off the brakes and then busy shooting, and then things start to go wrong, I've already lost a second or two in reacting, and that could be the difference between surviving or perhaps a fatality.
Exactly.
And maybe I don't mean to sensationalize that, and maybe, but what I'm trying to stress the point is it's quite difficult to combine both well. So I love having a tandem pilot like Ferdy van Sloven, who did this trip for me, because I know he's an amazing pilot, and he can focus on flying 100%. And me, what I know what I'm like behind a camera. I am so giddy behind a camera in the sky. I can't put it down. Like,
Mhm.
especially when the light was perfect and you're surrounded by the cattle quorum, I just wanted to keep shooting and I wanted to be able to focus on that 100%. So that's my reasoning why I choose to fly with tandem pilots and put my trust in them, because at some point there's only so much you can multitask. It is so difficult to do everything well, uh, and I just don't have the capacity or the time to want to prioritize becoming an amazing paragliding pilot, because it's just not
No,
going to be
no, you
possible.
should. I think that. I mean, to me, that makes the most logical sense. Really, I mean, they're two pretty tricky things. If you're up in the air, floating way above the earth, trying to take stunning pictures, you have to be able to react quickly, regardless, because that image, that even the one that you took here, you sail, go a bit forward, a bit back. The light changes, a cloud comes. Who knows what? You're not going to get it. So to be able to then control a paraglider at the same time, I mean, well, respect to those who do it, like you mentioned Jodie McDonald. But I mean, when I look at this picture and I've put it up on the screen now, I can't really. I mean, personally, the idea. I've only been on one tandem flight paraglider, and it was extremely exciting. But the thought of trying to take pictures and fly that thing at the same time is too much to comprehend. And I think, bearing in mind the lessons that you mentioned you learned in the Arctic of trying to maybe do too much or biting off more than you can chew, I think that's a wise decision. And I'd highly recommend that going forward, you don't try and learn how to be the most amazing paraglide pilot, because frankly, you're taking great shots in a tandem. So stick with it. That's my verdict.
I'll, I'll keep doing so.
Just one quick one. Why did you choose to put this into black and white? Any particular reason?
uh, well, funnily enough, I had a friend who reached out to me. He edits a small magazine here in Australia. It's just Wild magazine, and he was searching for a winter themed portfolio or an essay, photo essay to put in the magazine. And so, because a trip to Alaska got cancelled, or so I should say postponed back in March, I had to go back through my archives and find something. And as I was putting it together, we came up with this really cool layout where it involved I guess sometimes, I don't know, you look back on images and it just made sense to go black and white on that.
Yeah.
For a long time, when I first started photography, I was always black and white. And then I went to this workshop in New York, and it was the Eddie Adams workshop. And one of the mentors there, he said to me, he's like, "You don't know how to shoot color. You're confused when I look at, like, I feel like you're confused when you're trying to shoot color." And for some reason, that comment got under my skin, and I'm stubborn. Anyone that knows me knows that I'm stubborn, and so if there's someone says I can't do something, then I'm like, well, I'll prove you wrong. I'll show you that I can do that. And I don't know why I took that reaction to that comment. So for then most of my career, I've just gone back to color, and then recently I do find this natural draw wanting to get back to black and white, because suddenly I didn't know how to see the world in a monochromatic way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a fun. Like, it's interesting when you look back on your work over the years. You look back and you'll see new images that you hated at first, and then
Absolutely.
suddenly it's like, oh my god, this is the best image I've well not ever taken, but
No, this was
it's got a new
formative.
life.
This is the reason, could be part of the reason why I shoot the way I do now. I mean, all photographers do. It's well
Yeah.
known, isn't it? You go back over your archives, and images that you thought were nothing speak to you in completely different ways 10 years later. So, not
Oh,
not
absolutely.
unheard of. No, well, great. I mean, well done. Cool, very cool image. Now,
Hmm.
the next one I'm going to put up, you're keeping your feet slightly closer to the ground.
Yeah.
This is the rock climbing image. So, whilst
Yes.
you are clearly hanging off a cliff, we can at least see the ground in this picture. So, what's going on here? Where were you? It's actually, if you look at it closely, it could almost be a self-portrait.
Yeah, I've had a few people mistake for some reason thought that I was Steph Davis, and it's like, oh no, like I cannot climb that hard. I wish I could. But the reason why I wanted to get an image like this in here is because it's not a massive expedition. I didn't go to a far off exotic country. However, it is in the States, which is exotic to me, but it's definitely more accessible, I'd say that. And so I was just coming back from a broken ankle. I broke my ankle in skiing in Jackson Hole a few years ago now, and I was finally like getting back into some work, and I was hanging out with Steph, and she mentioned, "Hey, look, I've just climbed this route. I really need someone to shoot me on it." So of course I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to." And it was so nice to not have to worry about massive expenditures or all this planning. It's like, hey, let's just go out for the afternoon and go shoot this climb. So it's just a little half-day venture, which is refreshing. And thankfully, like this moment, I was actually shooting a bit of film because I was trying to put together that Where the Wild Things Play project for outdoor research.
Yeah.
And so I was actually filming. And at one moment when we were working on this part of the climb, I noticed the wind had started to pick up a bit. And so I quickly switched back to stills because I just knew it's probably, I think in my subconscious, that it was inspired by Jimmy Chin. Funnily enough, he has another image of Steph in Yosemite, and same thing, the hair had fanned out on a climb. So I think that might have been running subconsciously in my mind. I like to think my image is a bit stronger because I just love the desert colors, and her just like perfectly blown up. But yeah, it's interesting because I think as a photographer, you always have to look for the subtle moments. Like, is there something else that adds to the story? And not that it's like wind blowing hair perhaps adds to a story, but it adds to the emotion of the image. It just, for some reason, it created so much more energy into what she was doing, because it's it's a 513 crack, for Christ's sakes. Like, that's hard.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's like images need something else, and it might be how the light's playing. I mean, today or that day, it was flat and overcast, which I loved that, because the trouble in climbing is that your climbers in the shadow, but the background's in sunlight. It's like, oh god, it's really hard to make that work. So sometimes, and particularly in the desert, when you have those flat overcast days, they're the best because you can shoot all day and just get these amazing textures and tones to work with.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Punch it up a bit in post as well, and you've got something that's really nice. I love the shot with the way that the crack, sort of, you've pulled the crack from the top corner. Obviously leading line, classic kind of classic photo trick. You mentioned her hair waving around, which gives the impression that A, either it's windy, or B, she's in motion and lurching up to go and get her next grip. And obviously as well, I really love the little guy right down at the bottom, the guy or the girl, the person right there.
Oh yeah, the Blair.
Exactly. That's great. It's really cool. You can kind of get a bit of perspective as to how far away, or how high up, she is. From your perspective, did you go up to the top of the climb and lower yourself down, or did you climb up, or are you leaning over the top of the climb? And what's your sort of situation? How are you taking the picture?
Where we were, there was only one climb, which is this climb, and that's it. So with a lot of professional climbers, generally there's not always going to be that top access. And so with Steph, I'm trying to think to that day. She might have already, no, we had to set up a rope. Sometimes climbers will just climb the route for a warm-up, and basically put my static rope, tie into a harness, get to the top, set up an anchor for me, and then I'm just jugging up or sending the rope with, of course, jugs and senders and all. Senders and all that. Anyways, so I'm climbing up the rope, and then I'll pick up the end of my rope, like tie it up nicely so it's not back in the image.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's been other climbs, like even in the Blue Mountains. Sometimes you get, Moab. Other places in Moab, I would say. There are some places, again, no top access, but there's a range of climbs. But if you're working with, top climbers like Steph, it's like, again, I don't have the time to dedicate to put myself at a high grade. And sometimes it's just easy that she might go, you know what, the next climb over is super easy. So I'll just climb up, warm up, set up your rope. And then as she comes down to recover before she starts climbing, then I get up into position. So generally you have a working relationship with climbers and you figure a way around. But of course, other times I'm setting up if I can access the top or, and sometimes with rock climbing, you don't have to be on a rope too. Maybe the landscape lends itself to a different, there's a natural viewpoint to find.
Of course,
like,
yeah.
Again, I've worked with Steph quite a lot. So sometimes I've actually hiked to the opposite side of the canyon, climbed up some rocks, and then just shot directly across. And that's usually one of my favorite angles to play with.
Ah, cool. Yeah, getting the higher perspective. Obviously, you can find some higher ground so you can shoot in. No, it's cool. I mean, it's a great shot. I love it. So it's nice to hear how you were doing it in this instance. I've obviously seen other photographers shoot rock climbing in that manner, and ascending. So I understand now how you were, but obviously from the picture's perspective, couldn't get any kind of grasp as to how you were doing it. So thanks for explaining. Now, from one set of kind of very interesting, active sort of action adventure type shots, we're now going to jump into what I alluded to earlier, storm chasing, which is a very different kettle of fish. So it's something that you've developed, as I mentioned, a bit of a passion for in recent years. We've talked about it a number of times together, and the shot that you shared with me and that I used as well on the marketing for the talk is pretty dramatic. Now I'll put it up on the screen, and I'd love to just hear. But before I do, I'd just love to hear a couple of reasons, or the reason that made you kind of find this passion for storm chasing. It's an adrenaline rush. It's a bit of a crazy thing to do, for sure. Very super interesting and amazing images. But why? What took you to it? Why did you start doing it?
Well, the last couple of years of my career, I've definitely have been venturing into more motion work. But even though in part of the introduction you mentioned that I was a cinematographer, I've actually taken that out of my profile these days because I've come to the realization is that I don't have photography when it comes to motion work. So if someone does hire me and I've got to shoot film, I just joke around that I hack my way through it. But I've actually taken more on a director role where I love coming up with the concept and then designing a team that can help me best put that, bring that motion vision together to tell that story. And then I can take photos on the side. And so the reason why I to explain that is that I had convinced Canon in Australia to allow me funding to produce these, direct these 3 short films, and one of them being about Nick Moyer, who is a storm chaser photographer.
Okay.
And I've known Nick. Well, I met Nick when I was 19, when I was doing work experience at Sydney Morning Herald, and our first meeting, put it this way, he told me that I was an idiot for wanting to be a sports photographer and that I needed to wake up and realize the true photography. And of course, as a 19-year-old, I was telling him to shove it. And we'd run into each other a couple of times over the years because I was in Sydney originally building my career as a sports photographer until I left. And we reconnected over this because I reached out saying, hey, I got a budget. I'm going to pay you to come to the States and, we'll go chase tornadoes. And out of it, I'll, create a short film for Canon. And I guess for those who haven't seen it, just Google Chasing Monsters and good chance you'll find it. And so that was the door into storm chasing. And once we did that first trip, what year was that? 2018. Yeah, I was hooked.
Sure.
Holy mackerel. Like, it is just a different beast.
Yeah.
And particularly just, I don't know, I'm really fascinated by any opportunity to have that like hands-on experience and being educated, particularly about Mother Nature, because what's really cool is that there is so much we still don't know about tornadoes. And I think that's why there's such a lure for a lot of people to be enthralled or like just completely encapsulated by it. Is just there's still so much we don't know. And when you do see a tornado in person, it's the same thing. It's like I remember I'd seen base jumping on videos before I ever met base jumpers, but that very first base jump that I shot, like I've just that feeling
Yeah.
of seeing someone actually with your own eyes run off a cliff.
Your
Like
heart, you can feel
it's
your heart
amazing. And so,
come out of your
oh
chest.
yeah, and so yeah, and same with storm chasing. Like the first time you see that tornado, even like us was one way in the distance. It was such a tease. But later that day, we actually saw our first one. It was in southern Wyoming, and the air was super still around us. And there, just a few miles away, was I think it was maybe like an F1, F2. I can't quite recall now. Tornado,
Mm.
and it's just yeah, it's surreal. You don't know how to explain it. It's like it's so beautiful, but then it was also causing destruction in this town. So
Oh,
then you're like, it's also terrifying
yeah,
and
yeah.
almost a bit like horror. Um, but with Nick, and you know even now he's still just a couple of weeks ago he was texting me over the phone to help me do one of my first solo chases here in Australia, just to chase a dust storm. So I have a lot to learn. I'm still a rookie at it, but it is, yeah, I think storm chasing might be, not might, it will be a part of my career for quite some time.
Nice, nice.
Um,
Well, this
yeah,
picture then, so putting this picture up,
yes,
this, I mean, that demonstrates very well the power and the impact that a storm can have, but also the amazing visual strength that a storm creates, when you capture it right. Where is this in that case then?
so this is one of the most phenomenal days, um, and something that I don't regret. And put it this way, I had found out later on, I was actually shortlisted for a job with a client, and I turned it down because I said I was storm chasing. And I later found out it was a job that actually was paying six figures. And so you think, could do with that money right now in
Wow.
times like these.
Chased your
But
passion, you
I
see.
don't, I don't regret it though, because had I missed out on seeing this day and seeing the mothership, I think that would have eaten away at my soul way harder than knowing that I've missed out on a really good paying job, which is interesting to say. But yeah, this day was wild. And I know the one thing I'll state up front is that I get a lot of questions from people like, oh, Chris, I'm going to go storm chasing, what's some tips? And the one thing is, it's like Australia's a bit different. Like the threat of tornadoes here is pretty rare. I mean, they do happen here, but it is rare. And when it comes to the States is so unique. Like people from around the world will come every year because it is so consistent and guaranteed to have tornadoes. And what scares me is when people in the States or who have this access are like, yeah, I'm just going to go storm chase. And it's like, you gotta be careful. Like messing around with Mother Nature, like that is unforgiving. It's like, it's going into the mountains with not the right experience. Like, yeah, you might get away with it. But to a certain point, it's, yeah, like the mountains don't care how much or how little experience you have. Like you make a mistake, it's very unforgiving.
Yes.
And same thing with storm chasing. It's like the threat of a mistake, it's pretty real. And so I try to tell people, it's like, look, if you're wanting to get into it, there are tours in the States, guys who've been doing it for many years. There's always going to be a risk, but at least with them, you start to learn about what they're doing, because there's definitely an art to it. Being able to read the weather maps, being able to read, different radars and know how the characteristics of a storm. And so with Nick, I've been learning a lot. And so this day, for example, we started the chase in Colorado. We followed it. We saw a funnel cloud, but it didn't quite connect with the ground, so it wasn't a tornado. A lot of people make that mistake. A funnel cloud is not a tornado unless it's bloody well connecting.
Okay.
And anyways, so we followed the supercell. It's starting to track and pick up speed into Nebraska. And as we're following it, last year there's a lot of moisture in the atmosphere. And so often it would just be gray. And we lost sight of this tornado. Or we didn't know it was a tornado yet, but we could see that energy, that raw energy of funnel cloud. And, the adrenaline's pumping. I'm usually the one behind the wheel. and we're chasing. And at one point, Nick's like, "Nah, pull the pin." And I questioned him, which I usually wouldn't, but I had so much adrenaline. I was like, "No, no, no! Like, are you sure? Like, we could just keep going." And he's like, "Nah, pull it." And I could tell, like, the second time he was really serious, and so I knew not to question, just listen to him. And so we sort of did this big circle. We basically just backtracked in a way, came back around. And the lesson there is that if you can't see it, if you can't see anything, it's not worth it. There was actually a tour that day that did get caught out, and were hit by part of the tornado, and it flipped the van like 20 times. And luckily, no one was seriously injured or worse. But it just goes to show, like, even experts, like, if you can't see it, you just don't know. Like, you can't see a tornado coming at you. And so as we came back in, we're in the RFD. So this is where, like, all this 2-inch hail is coming down. You got to scream at each other in the car. It's so loud. And it took us a couple hours to get out of this. We'll get to a bridge on the highway and it's blocked because everyone's trying to protect their cars. And for us, we're like, well, it's a rental, so we don't care. Let's keep going. And it's tough with hail because you don't know, like, 2-inch, like, every time it hit the windscreen, you just thought, this is it, it's going to crack. And you're always just, like, reacting. And so anyways, we keep pushing, and finally you see that silver lining on the horizon, and you know there's the edge of the storm. So we're like, yeah, go for it. Like, we're getting out of this. And it was crazy. Like, we come out and, we're driving down, and it's sort of like, cool, okay, that's that day done. And next thing we're like, you look at the sky, and suddenly it's like these beautiful striations just stretching out, and we keep driving south. And by now we're in Imperial, Nebraska. And the next thing, the excitement in Nick is just contagious. Like, he calls himself a storm nerd all the time. And we all start getting excited because next thing we know, what had happened was the supercell we had been chasing, there was a multiple vorticity tornado that did develop that day. And those ones are scary because they're the ones I've known to expand and get quite large really quick. And anyway, so there's so much energy that you have these outflow boundaries. And in those outflow boundaries, another supercell was created. And this is where the mothership was created. And so we had hit it at, like, the optimum time where, like, the perfect structure was in it. And yeah, we shot it because we did keep chasing it after this. As the temperatures are changing, the energy is always evolving in these supercells, and it started to lose a bit of structure after that. So we were super lucky that we hit it at that point. And yeah, hands down, like, I don't care whatever job in the commercial advertising world I missed out on, that was worth it, hands down.
Yeah, it's truly amazing shot. A couple of comments here, like, scary stuff coming through. I mean, that is ridiculously epic. To have driven through that, it looks like hell itself almost, kind of, or what you'd probably picture it to be like. It clearly sounds like you're becoming quite a hardcore meteorologist. To understand all this stuff is bananas. But the one thing I do want to put up on the screen is the profile shot that you shared with me of you photographing this. Now, we've talked about safety, and I think the thing that cracks me up here is that you are stood on top of a van in your thongs, so flip-flops, totally unsteady shoes with this ridiculously chronic storm right there. And I love it. I mean, that really sort of demonstrates another ridiculous length that you'll go to take a photograph. But it's great. I mean, there's the photograph back up on screen.
I know. I mean, like, I'm someone who loves to walk around barefoot. Like, I hate shoes. And when you're driving 12 hours a day, I don't want to be wearing shoes. Your feet get so stuffy. And it's tricky because you jump out, and if it's raining and hail and stuff, it's, well, raining. And then you're like, oh, then I got wet shoes on my feet. And when the chase starts, you don't have time to get dressed or undressed. Like, you got to have everything prepped. So often I wouldn't even have my rain jacket prepped because, like, you start the day hot, sweltering because it's summer in the Midwest. And the next thing, it's freezing. And if you don't have your jackets ready, it's miserable.
Of course.
So often I just wouldn't wear shoes. I just have my thongs on my feet, and I made it work.
That's true Aussie, really. True Aussie, very much so. So I love it. Amazing. I mean, super cool story. It sounds like I'm going to have to get in touch with Nick to see if he'll do a talk and maybe show us some more of his images.
Yeah, no, oh gosh, no, Nick loves to chat. He would be amazing to have on because his bushfire chasing, holy mackerel, like it is just next level.
Wow. Okay. Well, you'll have to hook me up with him, and I'll
Yeah, that's no worries.
see what I can do. So look, let's move on from all these amazing stories and just jump back into kind of current day, current time.
Yeah,
Uh,
yep,
you shared with me a couple of images. Now, I was going to originally ask advice. What have you been up to? During COVID in the last sort of 2-3 months, we obviously discussed that. You've been at home, you've had your feet on the ground, you've been relaxing and sort of taking a breather. But you have, as soon as some restrictions we were saying the other week were lifted in Australia, you have actually been out and been able to do one little storm chasing project, which you've alluded to, dust chasing. And you shared a couple of pictures of me, a couple of pictures, sorry, not of me, but with me, to put on the screen. So how about telling us a little bit behind, a couple of minutes behind the story,
yep,
as to what brought you to this, and I will put up on screen the shot of the birds as the starter.
yep, yep. And I also realized too, I want to make sure there's time. We're going to have time for questions. Or do people get a chance to
If they do,
send in questions?
we're we've got about 15 minutes left, just under 15. So be a
Okay.
bit more rapid fire with your answers on this one. But obviously, we're talking about a single project, and then we'll have a brief chat.
Yeah.
So
That's no worries. I'll be pretty quick on this one. Yeah, so as I said, like I haven't had any work this year, none at all. And this was my first job that had come in, thanks to an old friend of mine. And they've put together this project with the Queensland State Library, and it's about documenting people and communities affected by COVID. And for me, I chose to head out west, and of course, I had the permit and letter of approval. And by heading out west, I wanted to give coverage to this project because I was one of 5 photographers. So I decided to go rural, go west, because Queensland's quite a big place. And on my way, I went through all these small rural towns and I was connecting with people. I would just rock up, say hi. Sometimes people turn me down because they didn't want to participate in the project. But for the most part, people welcomed me into their lives, into their businesses, and I would take these portraits. But this was just a quiet moment on the road in St. George where all these galahs just took off at the same time. I was driving, so I quickly just grabbed the camera and took a few shots. But I was looking for subtle moments of just finding ways to, document the communities I was passing through. And the one tip that I was always taught from Ken Geiger, who used to be one of the deputy or photo editors at National Geographic, he said, look, when you shoot your action and adventure images, you know what you're doing. It's easy. Like, you know how to get that high octane moment. However, at that time when he was reviewing my folio, he said, but your lifestyle or the other moments, you need to work on that because you should be able to capture, any day moments, but make it feel like that high octane action moment. And not that there's action in the image, but there's that subtle moment that is so strong that it has the same power and emotion as if it was that peak action moment.
yeah,
And so that's been my challenge as a photographer for many years. And I'm enjoying this project because it's forcing me back into more photojournalism
yeah,
things. And I think as a photographer, I think I may have got a little comfortable in the last year or two. And by being comfortable, I think I maybe perhaps got a bit stale. I wasn't pushing myself as hard as I could. And I'm someone who needs to be challenged. And being outside my comfort zone, it's not easy. I don't want to always be there. But this project was really good. It got me fired up creatively again, and just, experimenting and remembering what it's like when you don't have a lot of time with people, when it's like, okay, I'm going to be able to talk to you for 5 minutes and I need to create a portrait.
yeah.
And I had to shoot 100 portraits in this project. And you tell you what, a lot of them, they probably didn't hit the mark. But I think there's a couple that I'm really proud of, and it was really refreshing to do this project.
Well, before I sling up the portrait that you shared with me from the same project, I just wanted to say something actually with regards to the bird shot. Now, when you sent it to me, it really struck a note with me. It really reminded me of a particular image, and so I was thumbing through some of my books this morning to try and find which one it was, and I found it. So I put it here, and it's a shot by Paolo Pellegrin. If I can find it. Now this
Yeah,
here
yeah.
is it's ridiculously similar. Now whether
Mm,
you've seen this shot at some point in your life or not, I don't
I have
know.
seen that before.
But that's by Paolo Pellegrin, who's from Magnum, and he's supremely well known for photographing in black and white. So there's to me there's and obviously Paolo Pellegrin is a photojournalist. So you've just tied up a ton of stuff that we've been discussing in that one single shot. Maybe you should go convert it to black and white. But obviously, we've touched on black and white, touched on photojournalism, and there you have this great shot that, for me, really does emulate clearly a great master. So you've obviously found that niche or the skills that you would normally place in action photography, and you've put it somewhere else. I mean, this is the birds taking flight over deserted roads at a very odd time in everyone's lives. So congratulations,
Yeah, yeah.
frankly.
Oh, thank you.
So the portrait, I'll put him up now. He looks quite unhappy. This chap.
Well, this is Doug. He owns a pub in Cunnamulla
Hi, Doug.
in Australia, and he, yeah, him and his wife welcomed me in, and I sat with them, gosh, probably for 40 minutes just talking, and that's the one thing for me. It's like, sure, I could be quicker in this assignment, and just come in and get the photos and keep moving, but people want to tell me their stories, and I wanted to listen because when someone welcomes you into their lives, I mean, that's one of the greatest privileges that we can have as a photojournalist. And yeah, and the tough thing too is breaking down people's guards when it comes to taking portraits. And I had a few people who would just start smiling, and I'm like, and I had to coach them a bit of like, hey, it's pandemic related. Don't think that's going to quite fit into the exhibition. And it's tricky because you don't want to change people's nature. But with Doug, I didn't have to say anything. That's just how he was. I was like, hey, Doug, will maybe take a seat at the bar, and that was it. And then I just let him do his thing.
Being himself.
Yeah, but it was sometimes through a neutral expression, there's more to be told. To be honest, it's like the one thing I wish I could have is just time to hang out with people and just be that fly on the wall and then really capture that natural moment. But yeah, no, Doug, I didn't have to really coach him at all or anything. That's just the way he came to rest in the image. Yeah, so I feel like it's a poignant sort of moment because a lot of pubs in Australia in particular, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but our hospitality industry has been one of the hardest hit. He hasn't been able to serve anyone for a couple months. He's still paying all his bills. Insurance was like $700 a week. And then you just think, how are you surviving? And even as our restrictions ease right now, pubs are allowed, 10 people at a time? And that's not feasible. When you have a massive pub that can host up to like 1,000 people, 10 people isn't gonna, it's not feasible. So it's tough. Everyone is doing it tough together. So yeah, that's why he's at the bar, an empty bar, and he's not happy because it's like he's under a lot of stress at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, in Britain, nothing's open, so I don't think you'd even get a picture of the guy in the bar. To be honest, there's nothing open.
Yeah.
There's talk that something might relax, but who knows? As regards to the project, because we're running kind of short on time. As regards to the project, are you putting these pictures up anywhere? Are they going to go on a website for anyone to see? Because it's,
it's going to the archive at the state.
Personally, I've shot a load of images of Bath, where I live, and I know another photographer who's shot a load of stuff of LA, and so I'm hearing of projects that are coming like this, photographing countries in time. So it would be quite nice to try to collect and collate links to that type of work. So is there anywhere to view it?
So far as I know, is that all my work goes to the archive at the State Library, and I think in time they want to run an exhibition, but I have to explore what I can and can't do with the images. But for now, I've signed an agreement, which I need to recheck that and see if I have any, what my limitations are or are not. Because obviously, I would like to do a little bit more with them, but I'm just grateful for the work
Of course, yeah.
because, as I said, it's the first job I've had this year.
But that side, I mean, you're doing something amazing. You're documenting a time and a place that, well, no one's seen anything like this before. So there's not many people out there doing it, and you're capturing it. So well done, very cool. With time drawing to a close, I'm just acutely aware that there is really one sort of two questions that you have to give quite short fire answers to, otherwise we'll
Okay.
sort of be cut off. Is that, have you given any thought really as to how you're going to be doing business differently now going forward? Kind of a minute, like give us your.
Okay, Jesus. I have and I haven't. Uh, I guess on one hand, gosh, I probably should be paying more thought to this. But what I'm doing right now is I am focusing more energy here in Australia. I'm represented by the Pool Collective, so I have been focusing more energy into commercial and advertising work because editorial just isn't the same as it once was. And I've got bigger bills later in life to be managing. And so, yeah, we're focusing here. Clients have said they're going to start booking work in September. So I have a lot of hope riding on that, which is a bit scary because there's a very good chance that they may say, you know what, we can't justify spending that money. Like, why would, say, Toyota do a car shoot when no one's buying cars? So I'm a little bit nervous, but I still have hope that I can still do what I do. I'd say, how am I restructuring? I'm coming to the realization that I don't need to travel as much as I was. I don't think I was as efficient as I could have been the last couple of years because you need space and downtime in life. And so at the moment, I've been designing ideas. I've got some really exciting ones coming up because a new opportunity just came my way recently. But I can't quite get into that because that's not a 1 minute answer.
You're going to run
But
out
put
of
it
time.
this way, is like, if the world opens up again, I will definitely be a lot more restraint in my travel. It has to be a damn good reason why I need to, because if not, I think I owe a lot more time and dedication here in Australia. And but for now, I'm just focusing, a lot to commercial and advertising and still passion projects.
Cool. Okay. Then that's about you. Global, last question. Name one thing that you think will change forever as a result of COVID.
Oh, right now,
Rapid
the one thing
answer.
I'm hoping, I just hope the world resets. Take it as you want. I just want the world to reset. I think most people I've talked to, everyone's looked at, they've had a chance to reevaluate their business. They've had a chance to, find ways to operate better, be better. So I think if anything comes out of this, I hope everyone is trying to be better. I think that's what we hope for. But I do think, I think travel for a long time now, I'd like to think it's going to change. I like to think people are going to be more environmentally conscious.
Yeah.
But God, that's a late answer. Oh, because then I know people would say, "Well, you're a contradiction, Krystle." That's a long.
That's fine.
I can't
You've
summarize
asked.
that in a minute.
You've asked for the world to reset, and that's brilliant. I think well said.
Yeah.
I agree. I 100% concur. So look, so that we can wrap this up nicely and neatly. I'm afraid we don't have any time for any questions, but thank you for viewers.
Reach out to me on my
you.
Instagram. I'll try to answer them.
Absolutely. Reach out to Krystle, hound her if you've got any questions. Maybe we'll do a part two. Maybe we'll do a part two. We'll have a think about that.
Sorry.
Krystle, thank you so much for joining us. Don't apologise for anything. You've been amazing. You've told us some cracking stories, shown some brilliant images, and it's good to see you in good health. So for now, I'd like to say a big thank you for joining us, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
That